So first of all, I would like to welcome everybody, and I would like to say how truly delighted I am to see the amount of attention this space is getting, because it means an increasing number of people really do care about this eminently important topic that is privacy, and that really makes me happy to see that. And I think this topic is now more relevant than ever before. I mean, I've been in crypto for almost 10 years, and I think it has never received as much attention as it is receiving right now, and I think it's for good reasons. And partially it's for the events of the last years. During the pandemic, I think we all have seen that the state has been expanding its reach. And another topic that's recently brought privacy to our attention, to the spotlight, is the Twitter files. The Twitter files are showing us how big tech is operating, and it ain't pretty. I mean, it's there's a lot of surveillance, censorship, and even, we could say, even propaganda embedded in it. And the writing is on the wall where the legacy financial system is going to go next, and it's CBDCs. This will happen in a few years, the trials. Whether we like it or not, I think it's clear that there will happen. Maybe there will be failure, maybe not, but they are going to happen. And there has never been a better time, I think, than now to start caring about this topic, to start caring about privacy. And but in this space, I want to talk about privacy in general, and then also about privacy coins. Reflecting on the past year, what happened in the past year, I have seen a definite increase of interest in privacy coins. And the reason is, I think, the catastrophic crash that happened sent shockwaves across the so-called crypto industry. I mean, the FTX, we could say it was a tragedy because so many people lost money. So many, I mean, we can't even imagine, because these stories don't come out often. People are afraid to or ashamed to admit, to post about it publicly. But it's so many tragedies that we don't know about, and I extend my compassion to all those who lost money. But at the same time, I think there is a silver lining, so to speak, that it will force, and it has forced many people to reflect on, what is broken in the crypto space as it is right now, and what are the core values. It will force many people to reflect on it, and I think we know that increased regulation is coming because of what happened to FTX. I mean, that will be the reason why, and the justification for increased regulation that is coming. So this is another reason why privacy coins are getting so much attention. And because during times of bull runs and prosperity, where everyone feels like Midas, whatever they touch, they turns into gold. Everyone is a genius, so that is not very stimulating to thought and reflection. People don't think so much during those times. But after a crash, that's the time when people will reflect and will think, why are we even here? What is this even all about? This crypto stuff. Because for us who have been in this for a long time, these things have been clear for a long time. But for many, let's say newcomers, this is new. So Seth, I would like to welcome you, and StoicXMR, I would like to welcome you, and everyone else who is listening to this. I'm so happy that you're here. Seth, do you think we could be at such a crucial juncture right now that things could really turn the attention to privacy coins in this year?
Sorry, I was muted there. Hey, Tivra. Yeah, thank you for having me. Really excited to talk about this topic. And I think it's something that has been just rapidly growing in the minds of people who are in the space for more than just making money, and really for the broader community out there who's freedom focused. I think we're seeing things take off from the privacy perspective, because people are starting to understand that for these things to actually work in adversarial environments, we have to have privacy at the forefront of how we build out not only our cryptocurrencies, not only our layer one blockchains and even our layer 2s like Lightning, but how we build out the tools that help us to build those tools. Ultimately, we need ways to chat in private and decentralized ways. We need ways to be able to exchange with privacy and decentralization at the core of those. So we've seen this growth, and I think a lot of it we saw in 2022 because we finally had some good real world examples of what happens both when you don't have privacy and on how governments want to prevent their citizens from having privacy. Mainly the Freedom Convoy that happened in Canada at the beginning of 2022. I think made a lot of people realize that the transparency that's default in Bitcoin and the ways that people can shoot themselves in the foot using Bitcoin have real world consequences. And then just to briefly touch on Tornado Cash as well, we saw that the US government would like to prevent people from being able to use privacy tools. And obviously they used the claim that it was because of North Korean hackers laundering funds, but even that was only a very small percentage of Tornado Cash users. So I think we've seen both the need for privacy and that governments around the world are attempting to crack down on the usage of privacy tools and are attempting to keep ramping up surveillance on their citizens, that companies are continuing to ramp up surveillance and try to leverage this for their own gain and not for our gain. So we're seeing a lot of people wake up and we're seeing privacy coins and privacy tools see a massive uptick in usage over the past year or so as a result.
Yes, you bring very good points. And I think, Seth, your path, personal path, was you basically started working with cybersecurity, I think, for private companies, and that's where you saw the surveillance tools that are available to companies to basically practice this surveillance, and not only just with data, but also metadata, which non-technical people are not aware of so much. And and if I'm not mistaken, you. Because we met at our times of when we were chatting about Decred, and then later you became more prominent in the Monero community. But I think lately you have been focusing on Bitcoin. Is that correct? I mean, privacy in Bitcoin.
Yeah, I've kind of gone full circle in a way, but really my roots are mostly focused in Monero and in the Monero community, and a lot of my kind of continued work behind the scenes is. But like you said, I have kind of, I guess, pivoted back to more of a full-time focus on privacy within Bitcoin. My cybersecurity roots, I think, have helped me to understand the technical tools that are available for surveillance. But honestly, I only really woke up to the need for privacy, both within cryptocurrencies and just digitally more broadly, really happened when I started to chat with people in the Monero community where there's a real focus on personal privacy, very holistic personal privacy. So that really started to make the need for privacy within cryptocurrencies clear to me. And those conversations were why I eventually stumbled into Decred, because I liked the approaches that were being taken with CoinShuffle++ and mixing being a kind of a core piece of Decred's approach. Also, obviously, why I have stuck around Monero for so long and have focused a lot of my efforts on education and just really getting people interested and helping people understand what Monero is and what it can bring as a tool for freedom. But yeah, have pivoted more to Bitcoin recently, both because now I work full-time for a Bitcoin-centric company called Foundation. So a lot of my work is around content creation, and my passion is privacy. So whenever I'm looking at Bitcoin, I'm looking at it through the lens of how do we improve privacy here, both on-chain and in things like the Lightning Network.
Interesting. And I guess it's also because with Bitcoin, I mean, you can impact the most people, right? I mean, because it's the most, it has the highest network effect. So by talking to Bitcoin people about privacy, you can impact the most. But what I wonder is, because I also know you have a podcast, I think it's called Opt Out. And I wonder if you thought about this and talked to many people. Do you ever get frustrated in general that when you see that so many people always prefer to pick convenience over, over sovereignty and privacy?
Oh yeah, definitely. It's a common and constant kind of pet peeve, seeing people choose what ultimately is harmful to their freedom long term because it has short term convenience. And I mean, really, it's just kind of a sad state of the Western world specifically, but really the the entire world of people shifting more and more their entire lives towards quick gratification and convenience, and not being willing to put in the work or to do the slightly harder thing to gain long-term benefits. So it's definitely a frustration, but it's one of those things where, like, the more time I've spent within privacy circles, the more time I've spent talking to people, it really is something where people usually either they need to get burned in some real world way. It doesn't have to be like something terribly detrimental, they need to go to jail or anything, but either they need to be burned or someone they knows needs to be burned with the surveillance system, needs to be burned with, I mean, for just self-custody of Bitcoin, they need to be burned by having funds lost on an exchange or having a friend that went through it. And it's usually once people experience what the downsides to their choice for convenience and instant gratification are long-term, they start to be willing to take those extra steps to work towards personal privacy. And it's one of those things where once you start, you really do see that your quality of life, I think your peace of mind increase, because you're not as dependent on all of these third parties that can and ultimately will harm you in some way or use you for their own gain to your own detriment. So it's one of those things that definitely benefits people long term, but it is frustrating to see people choose convenience or instant gratification over long-term freedom.
Yeah, interesting, and I think we have to come to the conclusion that there is no other way for people to start caring really, except some kind of shock, some kind of either just something that induces fear in them or something that happens directly to them. But when I was basically reflecting on the last year, what happened, and one of the things that really surprised me is and I also tweeted about this, the price performance of Monero, right? And I'm not speaking this from an NGU perspective, trader perspective, not at all. But it's rather peculiar what happened, because the common wisdom is that when Bitcoin is falling, all altcoins also fall even more, and so on. But last year, I mean, Monero totally didn't obey any of these trading common places, and also the way the price moved, it was like a slow grinding up, which made me think, but could it be because if it's actually used, so when bear markets are a financial phenomenon. They happen because previously there was a hype and then there is a dump, and one would think that having a non-speculative use case during bear markets actually offers some resistance to the price falling, because there is a constant demand that is non-speculative, so it comes from voluntary markets and so on. So if this thesis is correct, hypothesis is correct, and people seem to agree because they voted on it on the poll I posted, then it would mean that, I wonder, do you think it could also attract people to think about privacy in this way, because some people will never ask, philosophically, why it's privacy important. They will never care about it philosophically, but maybe some will care through this means, where they see that something that has privacy also is used in voluntary markets, and this causes constant demand, and this causes certain, let's say, protection against bear markets and so on, because no coiners. The main criticism no coiners always offer against cryptocurrencies is its volatility. But I think volatility happens because it's mostly cryptocurrencies are by and large financial phenomenon. They don't have enough non-speculative use cases. But now I think with Monero, maybe we saw what having a non-speculative use case does. Actually, it offers a counter argument against this no coiners perspective on crypto, that it's too volatile and so on. Perhaps this is the way to make it less volatile. What do you think?
Yeah, I definitely think over the last year we've seen all of the building and all of the intentionality within the Monero community to be non-speculative at our core. Like, obviously there are people who speculate on Monero. There's a separate subreddit for speculating on Monero. Like, there are people that do that. There will always be people that do that with cryptocurrencies. But I think there's been a very intentional effort within the Monero community to not get sucked into the kind of the number go up hype train, and fall prey to only looking at an asset, or only looking at a tool like Monero as an asset, and only talking about it as an asset, and forgetting that the reason these things exist is, obviously this is widely debated, but in my opinion, is as a tool for freedom. And ultimately, to be a tool for freedom, you need to be able to save in it as you will and spend from it as you will. And so I do think that we've really seen that this focus on being non-speculative as a community, and focusing very, very heavily on trying to help people to actually use this thing day to day, is showing up in the price. And like you said, I think there is value to look at price in a non-speculative way and see that this, I think, shows in theory that there is a very much an active user base, and there's a real use case for Monero. And I think when you look at things outside of price, when you look at the adoption by merchants, when you look at the increase in merchants accepting it, when you look at those merchants that accept Monero and Bitcoin and Lightning and other cryptocurrencies, who are all seeing steadily growing and often outpacing, always outpacing Lightning, often outpacing Ethereum, sometimes outpacing Bitcoin in usage, you're starting to see that because Bitcoin has not iterated on privacy and has not iterated on the base layer spendability like Monero has, that the people who want to be able to spend funds easily, cheaply, and with privacy are just flocking to Monero. It's just a very simple user experience. It protects you by default. You don't need to think about running a Lightning node and managing liquidity. You don't need to worry about CoinJoin or all of these different techniques that are immensely important in Bitcoin, and we need them, and we need them to improve. But when you use Monero, even if you don't even know what privacy is or why you care, you gain strong financial privacy. And that's really a piece of things that I think is huge, and why Monero has increased in price, but really also why Monero is really experiencing a massive snowball in usage growth, even during the depths of a bear market. I mean, this is one of the historically worst bear markets, and yet Monero usage across the board and every metric that we have is continuing to increase and continuing to grow, which I think shows that there is a real use case, that people want Monero for more than just speculating, and that there's a lot to be said for focusing on the kind of the narrative of digital cash and on actually using a currency as a tool, and building these circular economies.
Yes, that's a really good point. I mean, that's first time when I remember reading the basically Bitcoin white paper. It's there, right? Digital cash. I mean, that's what I initially actually thought I was getting into. When I back then, my intro to Bitcoin actually was through Silk Road, even though I never purchased anything there. And I'm not just saying this to not incriminate myself, but I really never purchased anything. But it's what I thought it was. And I thought it was an anonymous digital cash, global, and so on, because I didn't really study it in depth. And then later, this other narrative started dominating about it being digital gold and so on. And that's when I thought, okay, maybe I should accumulate this thing and so on. But initially, I didn't even think about that. I just thought this is the native anonymous cash of the internet. That's what I thought. And I think people who are saying that Monero is actually close to that than Bitcoin is, I think they're right. But I wonder, do you see it as store of value, or do you see it only as means of exchange, or do you see these two things as connected or not? I mean, I guess when I talk to newcomers, I still tell them just buy Bitcoin, because other things are maybe too complicated for a newcomer. First, they shouldn't understand the whole UTXO model and so on. But I wonder, do you see Monero as a store of value, or more as a means of exchange?
I mean, I definitely think it can be both. And I think the the approaches that have been taken are to ensure that the method of exchange use case continues to thrive and function well, but those haven't been done at the expense of the store of value case. And really, Monero mirrors a lot of the benefits that Bitcoin has. Yes, it doesn't have a hard cap, but instead it has extremely low inflation that perpetually approaches 0%. So it's already a negligible amount of inflation, less than gold, less than Bitcoin, slowly decreasing over time. It has very similar tools where you can actually store and use it. We definitely, I think, do need some improvements on the tools you have available, especially hardware wallets when it comes to Monero. But you have the same tools available, same seed model, same bearer asset. Obviously, I think if you can make a case for Bitcoin as a store of value, you can just as easily make a case for Monero. I mean, I think the inherent risk in Monero is obviously it is smaller. So there's some risk in it having less liquidity, other things like that. But for the average person, those are pretty negligible. And the other main risk to make sure that people understand is there is the possibility within Monero of an inflation bug that wouldn't be seen. I think that is an extremely low risk, but it is something that I think a lot of Bitcoiners like to hate on Monero for. But that potential risk comes at the massive benefit of everyone gaining strong financial privacy within Monero, which ultimately can also drive demand for Monero, which helps the store of value use case. And I think that's some of what we've been seeing. I think that many people will kind of land in the pitch that I've been rolling with recently, which is Bitcoin for savings, Monero for spending. And not because Monero is not a store of value, but because I understand that people are more comfortable with Bitcoin as a store of value. It has a long track record, even though obviously it also has terrible downturns, just like every other cryptocurrency does. Bitcoin does, I mean. So it's not a perfect store of value, and I don't think we've seen it play out as an inflation hedge either, unfortunately. But I think Bitcoin as a tool for savings with the strong on and off ramps between Bitcoin and Monero that are here and are coming soon to help you be able to swap in and out seamlessly and in a decentralized way will make it so that you can save your value in Bitcoin or Monero if you want, obviously. But if you want to save your value in Bitcoin, you'll be able to use things like atomic swaps, like Surai, which is a decentralized exchange that's being built right now. You'll be able to use these tools to be able to swap some Bitcoin into Monero, like every month or every few months, whatever you want to do, and then just spend from Monero instead of Bitcoin so that you gain the strong spending privacy from Monero. You have some exposure to Monero, so if Monero does well, you'll also gain some money or gain some spending power, but you can keep the core of your savings in Bitcoin. And I think that's at least the place that most people will start. But I do think that once people actually start spending and using Monero, they'll start to understand that the store of value properties are there and the actual financial privacy they care about more than just when spending. Because even when you're saving money, you don't want to reveal information about your savings to anyone outside as well. So I think there's a strong use case for Monero to be both. But I do think that the sweet spot for a lot of people right now will be Bitcoin as savings, Monero for spending, and then just deciding for themselves whether they want to go more heavily into Monero, more heavily into Bitcoin, whatever kind of fits their specific use case.
Interesting. Another thing I wanted to ask you is whether you think the price performance in 2022 of Monero is related to the fact that it adopted RandomX, and because something really overlooked is what problems were caused by ASICs in proof of work coins. For instance, I'm aware of the case of because I'm close to Decred, but I'm also aware of Digibyte and so on. Because what happens when you outsource your proof of work to specialized hardware, to ASIC miners who are basically not interested or not incentive aligned with your project, and they just dump immediately and so on. And this has caused a lot of dumping on many proof of work altcoins. And this is not a problem with Bitcoin because there is such a high constant demand for Bitcoin, and also the miners are more aligned, and they don't just immediately dump it, but they save it for selling it more rationally at better times and so on. So I wonder if you think this also plays a part, the fact that RandomX so far at least has worked to basically deter ASIC specialized mining, and reaches better alignment that people who are mining are also people who care about Monero and so on. And because personally, when for instance, I remember when Litecoin was released, it was one of the main selling points was that it's going to be not only ASIC resistant but GPU resistant, and that was true only for a few days. I think. I mean, GPU miners came out immediately, and then ASIC miners and so on. So initially, I was also skeptical about RandomX. I thought this cannot deter ASIC miners, but actually, so far it has. So I wonder, what role do you think this plays in what we have seen in 2022 with price performance of Monero?
I think it's hard to say how specifically that's affected price. I mean, I think that you can make the case that because RandomX precludes ASICs and makes mining farms more difficult, that there's more of a grassroots movement mining Monero, which means there's less likely to be sell pressure from Monero miners. But I think that would be very much just making assumptions. I don't really have data around that. I think the things that we can garner from looking at Monero's usage of RandomX and adopting ASIC resistance when basically no one else is anymore, everyone else has given up, is to understand that it has brought a lot of stability to Monero, both on-chain and off-chain, and that there hasn't been this need for constant iteration or changes or approaches to differing approaches to ASIC resistance since we implemented RandomX. So it's really made it so that it kind of feels like it has the stability of an ASIC mine chain and that there's not changes all the time. And yet we're not having to deal with the downsides of ASICs, which are massively, massively pronounced when you're looking at any cryptocurrency that's not Bitcoin. And I mean, that's always been kind of my thesis around ASIC resistance is I think if you can go with allowing ASICs on your network and can have many, many producers of ASICs, if you can have broad geographic distribution, if you can have easy access for anyone who wants one, that probably is the best approach. But the problem is basically only Bitcoin can do that and could do that because Bitcoin had this one chance to slowly transition from CPU to GPU to ASIC and do it in a way that minimized the harm to the network. Whereas with any cryptocurrency nowadays, you could very quickly, if you had a non-ASIC resistant algorithm, one producer could very quickly spin up an ASIC and just start mining in secret and obliterate your chain, sell everything that they mine selfishly. There are a lot of ways that could be abused. So I think for things that are not to Bitcoin, I think we'll continue to see them either move to proof of stake or just give up and let the problems with ASICs wreak havoc on their network and kind of live with it. And I think that's unfortunate, but that's one of the reasons why we wanted to maintain ASIC resistance, and thankfully RandomX has been wildly successful at that. I mean, far more successful than any other algorithm that I think would have had the focus that RandomX does. So it's been great to see, and it's helped to continue the theme of decentralization with Monero in the mining sphere, and combining that now with P2 pool, which is a decentralized pool mechanism for mining Monero, means that there's a very, very strong base of Monero mining that hopefully will continue to grow as well, but that can stand up even in adversarial environments, which, again, as we move into more and more caustic global geopolitical environments, it'll be important to have every aspect of the tools that we want to use for freedom be resistant to centralization, resistant to outside pressure. And I think RandomX and P2 pool are a big part of that for Monero.
Those are excellent points, yes. Previously you mentioned about the fact that you cannot have perfect auditability basically on Monero if you have a non-transparent chain. And I think you would agree that this is basically the trade-off or the main difference between approaches which we mentioned previously, like CoinShuffle and CoinJoin and Moneros. And I wonder, do you see any advantage? Because we know the disadvantages of having a transparent chain. I mean, they're obvious. I mean, chainalysis and so on. But could you say that there is any advantage at all at having a transparent chain, and what do you think that would be?
I think the only advantage is having simple auditability. I think it's important that people understand that Monero is still auditable, but when you audit Monero, you rely on some more complex cryptography and math. Whereas when you audit Bitcoin, it's a much simpler process. And in theory, you could even just do simple calculator math with the UTXO set to audit the chain. I think that's really the only advantage to having a transparent chain. And to be clear here, the thing that makes Monero harder to audit and Bitcoin, Decred, et cetera, easier to audit is that Monero hides amounts. So that's the specific piece of the privacy protocol that makes auditing more difficult. But when you hide amounts, what that means is you can make transactions that on a transparent chain would leak immense amounts of data by like using exact amounts, by having a combination, like if you do a coin join, for instance, the vast majority of coin join protocols have to use a set denomination like 0.05 BTC, 0.01 BTC, et cetera. Because if you don't do that, it can be quite trivial to link inputs and outputs to a coin join transaction by amount. And within Monero, the privacy that you gain through ring signatures, which you can kind of compare to a non-interactive coin join. It's not really, but you can kind of compare it to that in your mind. Is that the decoy inputs in a transaction can be of any amount because the amount is not visible to anyone on chain. So it greatly simplifies the broader approach to privacy and enhances the other pieces that you use to have transactional privacy. And in a transparent chain, when you reveal amounts, any approach to privacy is going to be much, much more difficult because hiding that piece of data is either requires complete interactivity and complex transactions and things that haven't really taken off in Bitcoin, or you just give up on hiding it and you try to approach other things and just hope that amount analysis isn't a problem. So I don't think there are really any other advantages to a transparent chain because even in an opaque chain like Monero, where amounts are hidden, if I want to reveal information about a transaction, if I want to reveal the sends and receives in my wallet, I can do so. I can choose to do so. But it's up to me instead of being transparent by default and me having to take extra steps to gain privacy. And I think that's just a much, much better approach to any sort of tool that seeks privacy. I mean, any tool that claims to be privacy preserving, if it's not enforcing this privacy by default, you should question why those approaches are being taken, because any tool that wants to help users should ultimately do as much as possible to prevent users from shooting themselves in the foot or losing privacy. And so defaults are really, really vital there.
That's really interesting. So I would switch a bit the topic to so-called, usage in so-called darknet markets, and I don't want to use that word because it's a pejorative word, and I will use the word voluntary markets instead. I talked about this with StoicXMR, who is here with us, and could you please speak a little bit about basically, do we know that the darknet markets or the voluntary markets have switched or completely stopped using Bitcoin and moved to privacy coin, especially to Monero? Do we have any? Because having statistics or data, I think it's impossible because they are dark markets for a reason. But I have seen posts by law enforcement agencies of the European Union claiming that their data shows that everything has moved to Monero. Do you know how we know this?
Yeah, hi Tim. Thanks for having me. Yeah, I mean, so obviously the dark market started with Bitcoin back with Silk Road, right? So Bitcoin was really the dominant use. I suppose that's how Bitcoin got its start to begin with, and it's also the first currency that was used on the dark net. But I suppose over time, and it's really only been the last few years for my, in my knowledge anyway, because even say, I mean, pre the last bull market, still a lot of darknet sites were accepting Bitcoin. But we're seeing, I think one of the big things that we've noticed with the darknets is now that the largest darknet itself, Alpha Bay, which was around back in the day, back in 2000, I don't know exactly when it got launched, but it was certainly around in 15, 16, and I think it got shut down in 2017, but they're back now. But they were accepting only Bitcoin back in the day, and now they're basically swapped and they're only accepting Monero. I don't know the actual size of, I don't know if this is number one, this is number two, this is number three, but another big darknet market, Tortador, they're also accepting Monero, but they're accepting Bitcoin as well. I did just do a little bit of research for the sake of this, what do you call it? For the sake of this space. And I thought it was quite funny, I was on Tortador where they accept Bitcoin as well. And a lot of very suspicious listings, let's call it like that. Like they would have a lot of X product for a very cheap price, for example, and they're accepting Bitcoin only. You would think if you're actually serious, this isn't a honey trap. If you're actually serious, there's no way you're going to be accepting, let's call it a large amount of Bitcoin for a large amount of products in Bitcoin, in a transparent coin, when you could just use Monero, when you should be using Monero. So I think it's clear, the free market is choosing Monero. It's not exclusively used on the darknet, i.e., not every single site is accepting Monero only, but every site that I can find is accepting at least in part Monero or Monero only. And that's a big change from what we saw, Silk Market Day, so circa 10 years ago, right, where it was literally just Bitcoin only because that was the only one that existed.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add is it is hard to get those specific stats. The things that we get out of chain surveillance companies only talk about the Bitcoin transaction volume because they can't see the Monero transaction volume involved in darknet market usage. So we don't get the details in how much Monero is used in darknet markets, like transaction volume or anything like that. But like Stoic said, the thing that we do see is that the vast majority of markets now, at the very least, accept Monero. And many of the large ones have switched to only accepting Monero. And if you look, I think another really good indicator to look at is to look at the forums where darknet users congregate, where they chat, where they discuss cryptocurrency usage within darknet markets. Basically, all of the discussions are either about how to use Monero, about using Monero, or people telling people using Bitcoin to stop using Bitcoin and use Monero. The kind of the handbooks that are common in the darknet market have essentially stopped a while ago telling people to use Bitcoin and said, whenever you possibly can, use Monero. And so we've seen all of these other metrics show that Monero usage is taking over. We don't have those concrete details, but just looking at that, I think is a good indicator of what's happening. And I think for those who are listening who maybe you're not a fan of the concept of darknet markets or voluntary markets, I like that term, it's a good way to gauge how useful a tool is in an adversarial environment. Because when you think about what a darknet market is, it's people doing something that is illegal generally and making a financial transaction in order to do that thing. It's not always that, but that's generally what it is. And so when they're doing that, they're having to obviously have to be concerned with law enforcement, governments. A lot of different things are involved in that. And so if the tools that they're using are not working, they'll switch to ones that are working better. And when a tool like Monero is being used actively and is working very well with, as far as I know, no cases of Monero tracing leading to an arrest. I haven't seen any of those yet. There have been some cases where a person was using Monero, but they were caught in other ways. But it's a really good test of how useful a tool is, even if you disagree with the concept of darknet markets or voluntary markets. It's a really good way to gauge how useful is this tool when people are under duress, when they're in an adversarial environment. And so that's one of the reasons why I like to keep an eye on darknet markets and try to gauge what adoption is looking like there, because it's helpful to gauge how good a tool is. And kind of the inverse approach is when we look at something like the Lightning Network, which has been touted as a tool for privacy and has a lot of potential for privacy. It also has been shown to have a lot of flaws with privacy so far. They're getting worked on, and there's a lot of really interesting potential fixes coming. But the complexity behind actually using Lightning, the implications around privacy, the complex tools needed to be able to use it and to use it in a privacy-preserving manner have meant that, as far as I know, no darknet markets even accept Lightning. There's never been a Lightning-only darknet market, even though Lightning has been around for, now 5 years. So it's again a good way to judge how useful is a tool like this in an adversarial environment, because people in these environments will want what's simple, what works well, and what protects them in the most scenarios. And Monero has proven to be that so far.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point. I mean, with Lightning Network, I think one thing has been the simplicity aspect of it. I think it's just not simple enough. It's just simpler to use a privacy coin. I wanted to raise also these questions because I think also the community that follows these spaces usually is the Decred community, and I think we have basically a lot to learn from this, that the non-speculative use case is where it's at. I mean, this is the ultimate test of things, like you say. And on our new, on the new decentralized social media platform called Bison Relay, I hope something like a voluntary market will develop that should also bring this non-speculative use case to Decred. And one thing I wanted to talk about also is, because we mentioned before that, okay, regulations might be coming this year, and they may be pretty severe. And I'm, wondering, do you think Monero is ready for anything? I mean, it's ready for all kinds of regulatory, or even, banning it or whatever? Because I assume the one very important component of this is to have a decentralized exchange, right? Would you agree with that? That that's very important in the case it's banned everywhere?
Yeah, I would definitely say that the overall protocol and usefulness of Monero is already there, and even if there was regulation to come out that banned its usage, I don't think that there's much that could be done from a technical level that would shut it down and prevent its usage. So I think from that approach, I mean, Monero has been built from the ground up for this type of environment. I mean, this is the reason for many of the design decisions, and many of the decisions that were mocked early on because people didn't understand what was coming are now really getting proven in real time. And so I think on the actual transaction protocol and mining decentralization, all of those things, I think we're pretty much there, or at least as well prepared as you can be. But definitely the on and off ramps are the hard part. And that's where there's a lot of good ongoing work and the tools that are close to being ready. There are already good ways to get into and out of Monero in a decentralized way. You can do so on Bisq. If you already have Bitcoin, that's a great tool to be able to get in and out of Monero. You can do so on peer-to-peer exchanges like local Monero or Agora Desk, both of which work really, really well for buying and selling Monero for fiat. So if you want to spend dollars and get Monero, local Monero specifically is my favorite way to actually do that. Those are centralized though, so there is the potential of, if regulatory pressure came, they may have to shut down. So having tools like the upcoming Sarai decentralized exchange, where it'll be kind of like you can kind of think of it like a Uniswap for cross-chain swaps. If you know what Thorchain is, it's similar to that, but I think will be done better from the ground up, and we'll have a focus on Monero acceptance. And then atomic swaps are another real key win, where atomic swaps may have some liquidity issues just because of the nature of direct peer-to-peer swaps, but they are really the most decentralized, unstoppable way to do cross-chain exchanges. So there's a specific protocol that's being worked on around that for Bitcoin to Monero atomic swaps and vice versa. That's very close to completion. So I think both of those are really key to allow people to, even in an environment where Monero is banned, to be able to get into and out of Monero. Those are really important, but there's also just the aspect of each of us who own Monero or want to own Monero working together to build small communities of people who can trade dollars for Monero, Bitcoin for Monero, et cetera, and really building these kind of grassroots movements of being able to get in and out they're the most unstoppable method of on and off ramping from Monero. But tools like Sarai, tools like atomic swaps are going to be very important if that does happen. And really, I think are the only missing piece right now in improving that ability to get in and out of Monero in a harsh regulatory environment.
Yeah, I would just completely, Seth, you stole the words right out of my mouth. I mean, this is literally why Monero was created, right? And we're seeing that the free market is choosing Monero when it comes to people looking for censorship resistance and operating in an adversary environment. So that's what I'd say on the issue, I suppose.
You know, one thing that also makes things really convenient is, I mean, for on-ramping and off-ramping is ATMs. I happen to live near a casino, and this casino has a crypto ATM, which surprisingly has 4 coins, and one of them is Monero, and you can and it works both ways. I mean, for withdrawal and for purchasing Monero. So I think this is marvelous, and basically it's €1,000 without KYC. I mean, it's fabulous. But to be honest, I don't think this crypto ATM thing will last long. I think it's just a matter of time until they ban them. What do you think? Do you think this has any future?
Yeah, I mean, it sort of depends what thesis you put on the future. For me personally, I'm assuming the world's going to become a lot more dystopian via globalism, technocracy. So, yeah, I think we can expect a lot of fight back or pushback from, let's call it, the government and regulatory authorities onto Monero because, I mean, look at it already. Monero's been banned off a lot of exchanges because they know that it works. And Bitcoin hasn't been banned. And for me, that really says a lot. And I don't think Bitcoin will necessarily be banned because I think they know they can at least control it to some extent. Wow, yeah. I think a problem in the future is obviously how we're going to get broad liquidity into Monero. But I don't think it's necessarily an event. I don't think it just takes place over one day. I don't think one thing happens and the world's fixed. I think the world we're going to and the world we're going to come out of is more of a process than an event. So we'll see tightening regulations on Monero and onto, as Seth was saying, onto the on-ramps and off-ramps. But this is really just a sign that we're winning. This is a sign that it's a monetary system they can't control. It's a sign that they're dying. You know, every empire that's died in history, the regulations, the laws, the actions become a lot more irrational as they become closer to their demise. So, yeah, I don't think it necessarily needs to take place overnight. Like, I don't think it necessarily matters too much if they just, you know, ban these ATMs or whatever the case is. Obviously, they're not allowed on exchanges already, for the most part anyway. But I think as we're seeing, you know, Monero is being adopted by the free markets, by people who are looking for censorship resistance and all these kinds of real properties that are going to give them real freedoms and real value in the real world. So freedom, prosperity. So I think those are the natural, let's call them characteristics that are going to drive people to Monero anyway. I think regardless of what happens, whether they ban it or not. For me, the fact that they ban it is really just a sign that, I mean, we're fucking right. You know, they're not banning Bitcoin for a reason and they're banning Monero for a reason. That says it all to me.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, in some ways, banning it would even be good marketing for it. And I think another reason there has been a lot of use cases for Monero is it became much more convenient to use. And tools like Cake Wallet and Cake Pay come to mind, and I just see that Vic Sharma has joined us. So hello, Vic, welcome.
Hey, how are you? It's really good you're having this Twitter space. I think the subject of privacy and freedom to use your money needs to be discussed more. So it's a very good topic, and thanks for putting it together.
Thank you so much for being here. StoicXMR, you mentioned, where you think things are going, and actually, my vision of the future is a kind of a system where we have two parallel economic systems. That's how I see it. I mean, I would like this to not be the case, but I think that will be the case, and I think we will have this CBDC, the legacy system. Legacy financial system will reinvent itself through the CBDC, and then we will have like pockets of freedom where we will have this, circular economies, mini crypto anarchies that we will create to protect ourselves against the dominant system of the CBDCs. That's what I think. But I think it will be like a parallel system, and I wonder. I mean, the big question will be the bridge between these two, I think. What will bridge between the fiat or whatever will be the future of fiat, CBDC, and crypto? And I think there will always be bridges, and these bridges are extremely important, I think.
Yeah, I mean, there will always be bridges. The question is, how big will the bridges be, right? It might be a bridge where I sell to John Smith, my neighbor, because he's heard about Monero. He wants a little bit more freedom, or whatever the case is, or whatever the case is. Or there's bridges, like Binance or Coinbase, right, where you can onboard a huge amount of institutional money. Anyone can easily enough go on there and buy Monero. But I think the real, as I was just saying, I don't think it necessarily matters that much, because the smaller they make the bridge, the more they try and destroy our bridges. It's really just a sign of a dying empire. I mean, all the hallmarks are there. It really is a process. It's not necessarily an event. And the world we come out to beyond that, I mean, I think Monero is going to play a role in that. I mean, everyone has a sort of different thesis. I think fiat's, I mean, it might be around in one way, shape, or form, but by and large, it's dying. I mean, it's dying every day, right? So I think the world that we come out after fiat, in the post-fiat world, I mean, look at it. Are people going to choose to have their finances transparent to the entire world? Like, I mean, what world would we live in if that happened? I mean, I can't see. Ask yourself a question. The people you know in your life, your neighbors, do you think they're going to, want their entire financial history to be transparent to you, to their neighbors, to literally everybody? Like, no, like, people don't want this. And on this characteristic alone, I think Monero can play a huge role in the future. I think it's got nothing to do with illegal activity and, some sort of cypherpunk thing necessarily. I mean, people just want privacy in their financial lives, and we see that literally today. People aren't complaining about privacy in their financial lives today.
Right. That's a good point. I mean, sometimes people will say, I mean, that's the stupidest thing that you hear about this topic, that basically, if I don't have nothing to hide, why should I care, right? And I mean, it's surprising that people still do make this point after all that happened, but some actually do. I mean, I talk to people that do make that point, and it's surprising because like nobody would live in a glass house, in a transparent house. Everyone actually does already care about privacy in some way. So it's surprising that when it comes to financial stuff, which in some way it's what gives you the most power, right? That then you wouldn't care about that in that area. It's really surprising. And one other point that came to my mind, is like when I read on Twitter, about privacy, often people will say like it's a human right, we want this right, and so on. And I think that approach is, I don't like that approach so much, because like it's almost like you're begging the state to give you this right, like please give us this right. And that's totally wrong thinking in my mind. I think the word right is just basically power. So if you have the power to do something, then you have the right to do it in a way. In the sense, what I mean is this, that the technology empowers us to have privacy. It's not like the state will give us this right.
Yeah, you said it exactly right. People, when you say about living in a glass house, like people don't want to live in a glass house. They kind of just make that statement that privacy is for criminals, or however you want to frame it, in regards to giving government access to their financial life or whatever it may be, right? And I think it's just a bigger question about society in general. I think society has become very reliant on government to just, look out for them and provide for them and all these kind of things. I mean, where I'm from in Australia, generally speaking, the quality of life is pretty high. It certainly is compared to the rest of the world in at least a materialistic sense. Maybe not so much freedom as other places, but in a materialistic sense, when you grow up and that's all you know, you can certainly understand why a lot of people have faith in the government, especially when you don't understand, just a quick tangent, especially when you don't understand things like economics and they start printing money. And during the GFC, like the 2008 GFC, Australia printed a whole bunch of money and basically avoided the GFC while the rest of the world was going through an economic crisis. Australia was really going through an economic boom at the time, which is quite funny. So now it's funny, like Australians' responses to hard times, and we saw this again during COVID, was just print money. The politicians put out narratives, just print money, and the people were just like, yeah, this is such a great idea. This worked last time, and blah 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 blah. Right? But they don't see. It's like the frog in boiling water. They don't see the bigger picture. But yeah, so to come back onto the point about people just trusting the government, I suppose it's really a bigger question. Of how much trust society has in the government. And I think you're absolutely right. I think technology is the empowerment of people. And I think with Monero, we give ourselves the right to privacy. We don't have to ask the government anymore. I mean, technology, and the technology being a Monero, has literally given us, at least in my knowledge, for the first time ever in human history, the right to privacy, and there's nothing anyone can do about it.
Yeah, the only real things I'll add are I love the concept of privacy as a human right, and I do think it is an inherent right for each human to have the ability to choose what information they reveal to the world about themselves. But the thing with rights is that they have to be defended. Someone has to claim them, to stake out their claim, and they have to be defended through a fight. It's not something that you will just get if you just sit around. And I mean, we've seen that all throughout history, that when people wanted to improve their position, when they wanted to gain access to rights that should have been theirs as humans, but were stripped from them by a government, by some other nation state, whatever, they had to fight to regain that right. I think the same thing applies in privacy. And I love a phrase that Samurai Wallet and their kind of crew use, which is privacy is a human fight. And I think that's probably a better way of framing it, because it's not something that's going to come naturally to us, even though I think it is an inherent and natural human right. It's something that we have to fight to reclaim and defend from those who would like to take it from us.
Yeah, really good points. C12, you have a raised hand. You can speak.
Oh, yeah. Hey, I just want to say something about like what Stoic said earlier about this idea that privacy is kind of obvious, in the sense that everybody, of course, wants privacy, right? And I guess I'm just like not as optimistic in this area. I think kind of the COVID pandemic showed that a lot of people will kind of go in line with what the government says, and will likely go in line with CBDCs and all that. And I think what's more likely to happen in my eyes is like we'll see two different kind of worlds existing simultaneously, one with privacy and one with CBDCs and all that. And I think the only way to win potentially is just through efficiency and kind of survival of the fittest, where the private economy kind of performs better over the long term. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, you know, it's probably realistic to not expect everyone to care about privacy so much as we do. But at the same time, I think, I mean, I'm happy that we are given a few years now, I think, time before all that starts happening to increase the awareness about this as much as we can, because I think for a few years that future is not coming yet. I don't think you know, CBDs are ready even for trials yet. So I'm really happy that we have at least a few years to prepare for that, and we actually do have tools. I mean, amazing tools at our disposal. We have privacy coins, we have decentralized exchanges, we have some now we have some decentralized social media platforms, you know, like Nostr is becoming really popular, and Mastodon, and we have now Bison Relay. And I wonder, you guys tried any of the new decentralized social media platforms, and what do you think? Do you think that this can actually challenge the big tech platforms or not? Or it will be like similar to, you know, how Monero will coexist with, or privacy coins will coexist with CBDCs. The same will be for, you know, big tech social media platforms will coexist with these decentralized ones, but the decentralized ones will never overtake the other. What do you think, guys?
Yeah, I think they're really kind of a parallel tool, and we'll build a parallel social economy outside of the Twitters and things like that. I think that's true of Mastodon, it's true of Nostr, that's true of other tools that are being built out to help do social media in a decentralized and more self-sovereign way. And they're really important tools, but there's always going to be some extra friction involved when you're doing something in a decentralized way. And that's generally not going to lend itself well to the masses who don't care using that tool. I mean, it is possible if there's enough network effect for it to happen, but I do definitely see these tools as more of a kind of a parallel community building platform. And I think those are vitally important, because we have money that can build parallel economies like Bitcoin, like Monero. We need ways to be able to organize socially as well that aren't reliant on centralized companies, that aren't reliant on governments, et cetera, and give us freedom in communication just as much as we need freedom in our financial activity. So I think they're vitally important. I doubt they'll overtake the centralized alternatives, but that's not necessarily a mark against them. I think that's just kind of the state of things, and the state of most people wanting to just have convenience instead of other advantages. But I think there's also a rapidly growing movement in just the broader population to understand why privacy matters, to understand why they can't trust governments. And I've seen a lot of that shift over the past couple of years. So I think there is an optimistic take that these things start to gain enough network effect that maybe they do snowball out and beat out the centralized alternatives.
You know, another thing that I wanted to talk about, and it's basically this. We're talking about opting out of one system to another, right? We're talking about DEXs, we're talking about privacy coins, we're talking about decentralized social media. And something that comes up when I talk to people is often, you know, this feeling that some people have that it's already too late. You know, I already have been KYC'd by 10 exchanges. They have my passport, they have everything. All the social media platforms have my whole history, and you know, even if you ask Facebook or Twitter or whatever to delete, I doubt they'll totally delete it forever. So, and also, you know, exchanges have all the transaction data from the past, because in the past, myself included, we weren't thinking so much that all the data that the exchanges are keeping on us. And so what would you say, like, to those people who think, you know, it's too late, and it's like they have too much data on me already, so why should I go fully private now? What do you think about that?
Yeah, well, it depends from what aspect they're kind of concerned about. Like if they're concerned about from, again, why are they in crypto? Are they here to try and make fiat dollars? Okay, well, it doesn't matter if they got your KYC or not. I mean, anything for stocks, anything for all that kind of stuff. At the end of the day, I don't think you're here for the right reasons. I think crypto is really about fundamentally changing the monetary system we see in the world today. And I think there's going to be a lot of pushback in regards to that. I don't think the current global power establishment is just going to sit down and say, oh, okay, yeah, no worries. These, let's call them kids, can go and change the world and we'll just lose our position in the world. I think there's going to be a huge amount of fight back. And I think a lot of that fight back comes towards Bitcoin and the fact that you can surveil Bitcoin transactions, and you can kick down doors, and you can, monitor everybody's activity. So with the world that we're going into, I don't think it's too late. I think to say it's, I mean, what's global crypto adoption? I don't mean crypto speculation. I mean crypto adoption. I mean, real crypto adoption is circa 1%. So we're still incredibly early in the grand scheme of things. And I do tend to think we will start seeing things move quickly over the next couple of decades. We'll start seeing that S-curve adoption play out where it becomes exponential growth once we hit that the inflection point in the curve. So I don't think it's too late at all. And I suppose with Monero, talking short term and long term, they still can't see your transactions at all. So regardless of whether it's too late or not, the real question is, do you want them to be seeing your transactions? And again, not just the governments of the world, et cetera, but someone you send money to. Do you want your local supermarket to see how much money do you want your neighbors to see? Do you want your best friend to see how much money? I think those are probably the bigger questions. And I think anyone just to answer the question, I think anyone saying it's too late is really just missing the bigger picture.
Yeah, I agree totally, yes. But yes, I'm, preparing mentally in my mind, all the kinds of responses to these various basically people have some kind of spontaneous, I think it's a learned response, automatic, knee-jerk response to when you tell them you should go 100% privacy. And I think it's just learned. It's a learned, almost like a defense mechanism, because people simply need to be, I think, a little bit pushed into freedom almost, by default. They learn to be docile, and they learn to accept that this is the status quo, this is normal. But then once you taste freedom, I would say once you taste privacy and freedom, you then only then you see how the alternative actually is a form of subtle enslavement almost. And it's really good that we are raising these issues together. I wonder if anyone has any other thoughts. Maybe we could also involve the audience. If someone has any questions, anyone they would like to contribute, they can raise their hand.
Unfortunately, I do have to run, but just wanted to say thank you so much for organizing this, Tivra, and looking forward to hearing the questions that you do get. I'll listen in later. But thanks for organizing this. Really good discussion. I love this is becoming a more and more common topic, and you did a great job driving this.
Seth, thank you so much. I mean, you've been amazing, and your insights are really helping me advance my understanding of this topic. Thank you so much.
Yeah, have a good rest of your day.
Have a good day. Thank you.